What's up, everyone? It's Cannan, and today, for a special Halloween video, we are going to look into the mythology behind the Blair Witch legend. Now, yes, the Blair Witch is a work of fiction, and even though it has inspired 3 movies, a few video games, and several comics, novels, and such, the one thing that is the strongest part of the whole entire franchise is the lore behind the entire thing. In my personal opinion, it's the best lore that's ever been made for a horror franchise. So, why don't you sit back, get you a nice cold drink, a snack, and allow me to take you through the legend of the Blair Witch. So we start in about 1634. And all we know is that a colonel in the British Army by the name of Blair founded a fort in the new colony of Maryland, which he named after himself, Fort Blair. And the reason why, apparently, the fort ended up in the Black Hills Forest is because they were sabotaged by Native Americans that led them into the woods. And apparently, according to ancient records, the Native Americans greatly feared the Black Hills. So over the years, of course, the fort grows and eventually becomes the township of Blair, Maryland. Now, around 1769, an old Irish woman named Ellie Kedward crossed the ocean on a ship called the Reliant. Now, reports on her backstory are very hard to come by. And this current background that I'm going to go over is not confirmed. It is just reports. Some believe it was created to give her more of a tragic background. So reports say that her mother died during childbirth and her father was captured during some revolt and he was tortured and killed in front of her. She was later beaten, raped, and left for dead, but was eventually taken in by a hermit that taught her the ways of the occult. Some say she spent some time in an asylum, and some others say that she spent time as a prostitute, which resulted in 7 pregnancies. But no records of these children actually exist, and all this time she delved deeper into the world of witchcraft. Now, after she arrives in Baltimore, she settles in the town of Blair, Maryland. Now, of course, this is going into the cliche story of how witch tales all start, of a haggard woman in this new world, and she was already seen as kind of an outcast because her being an Irish Catholic living in a largely Protestant town, she was of course going to be already the target of much scrutiny. Now, things start to get interesting in 1785. It was in the middle of the winter, and several of the town's children accused Ellie of witchcraft. Apparently, she had drawn some blood from them, more than likely because of some illness that the kids were suffering from. Now, of course, this is, in that time, seen as an early sign of witchcraft. Now, keep in mind, this is after the Salem witch trials. This is really after that entire hysteria had died down. And in most areas, witchcraft was kind of seen as a thing of the past, except in the rural areas where there was still a lot of superstition going around. So she was tried, she was found guilty of witchcraft, and banished. And apparently at this time, the year she was banished was one of the worst winters in recorded history. And it's believed that they blindfolded her, tied her to a tree, and left her. where of course she would soon succumb to the elements. Now, there are some reports that say that some of the children of the town went out and like poked her with sticks, threw rocks at her and stuff like that, but that is hard to confirm. What gets really weird is the following year, all of her accusers and half the town's children had vanished. This, of course, is seen as a curse by what is now being called the Blair Witch. And so, as soon as the weather improves, the town packs up and abandons the town and vows to never utter the name Ellie Kedward. So by 1809, the town is long since abandoned, but a written account of the story, plus apparently some tales of Ellie's powers as the Blair Witch, is published, and it is simply called the Blair Witch Cult. A lot say it's fiction, a lot say it is true, but apparently there was an actual cult that worshipped the Blair Witch in some way, and many believe that it started around the late 60s and eventually branched out to today, though that is very hard to say. So in 1823, a railroad is being built, and it was either one of the railroad workers or the one that was in charge of the construction decided to go on a ride on his horse, and he ended up getting lost. He eventually found an old dirt road and followed it, and it led him into the abandoned town of Blair. So of course, finding this abandoned town, he got a hold of a friend of his named Peter Burkett, who was a land developer, and he came out to survey it. And in 1824, the town of Burkettsville was founded. And of course, once people started moving in, they started to hear the legends of the Blair Witch. Now, of course, at that time, many would say, you know, it's just a legend. There's no, they didn't really see anything until the following year of 1825. Now, the crops had come in. It was mostly wheat that the farmers in Burkettsville grew, and, you know, their harvest had come in. It was a good harvest, so they decided to have a little picnic down by Tappy East Creek. Well, apparently, a little girl, 10 years old, by the name of Eileen Treacle, was either playing in the creek or trying to cross it, and the creek's real shallow. It's only about 6 inches to 8 inches deep. A young child could usually even crawl across it. It was so shallow, but you know what they say, you could easily drown in a puddle of water. And apparently people started hearing a scream, and 11 witnesses say they saw a ghostly white hand come up out of the water, grab the child, and drag her under the water. But here's the thing, 6 inches deep, the body should have easily been found. It's never found. It pulled her completely under the rocks, the mud. She's never seen again. Now, of course, this is attributed to adult neglect. No one was watching the child drowned. But what's really weird is that shortly after Eileen's death, the water becomes polluted with stick figures and becomes really oily. And apparently, one man drunk from it and died instantly. And apparently some cows drunk from it as well and died. So people stopped using the creek for drinking water, for bath water, all that. It is completely unusable. And eventually the town returns to normal until about 1886. And that is the tale of Robin Weaver. Now, Robin Weaver was a young girl who just was out walking in the woods one day when a woman whose feet never touched the ground appeared to her and led her to an old house out in the woods. And the woman took her in the basement, told her to stay there, that she'd be back, and left her. Well, apparently, you know, many hours went by. She eventually got scared and crawled out of a small crawl space, a window crawl space out of the basement, and ran back to town. But what she didn't know was that the town had already started a search for her. Well, she shows back up on her grandmother's porch, but here's the thing. The first search party that was sent for her had vanished. And so when they never came back, a second search party was sent out to find them. And well, what they found was no short of a nightmare. They found the original search party on a rock that eventually would be called Coffin Rock. They were bound together, they had been killed, and they had been mutilated. And they were apparently put in the shape of a pentagram. Now, some reports say that, some don't. And so, of course, they didn't stay there very long. Of course, normally you would think, whoever did this has got to be close by. We don't want to end up the same way, and I mean, I don't know about you all, but I don't think anybody could have stood there very long. So they went back to town to get help, get the sheriff and all that. They come back, the bodies are gone, but they said they could still smell death in the air. And once again, time goes by and the town moves on. So if you notice, there is about, I believe, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about a 60-year difference in between events. And if you skip another 60 years to 1940, you get something once again. And that is, of course, the tale of Rustin Parr. Rustin Parr was an old hermit who lived all by himself out in the woods. He preferred to be alone, so he built a house in the woods. And this is a picture of the house right here. And, he just preferred the solitude of the woods. Well, apparently he started seeing a woman in a black shroud around the woods. And apparently, the animals and all that were around his house started becoming more fearful. And he even grew to fear the woman in the woods. And apparently he started hearing weird noises at night. He started hearing voices, until eventually he started doing what this old lady ghost was telling him to do. And apparently it started off as just meaningless tasks. And then came the murders of the Burkittsville 7. 8 children disappeared from Burkittsville. The 8th one, Kyle Brody, survived, but his survival was not without going through a horror his own. Apparently, he lured the children out into the woods to his house with the promise of candy, took them down in the basement by pairs, made one stand in the corner while he killed the other one, and then when he was done, he would pull the other one over and kill them as well. Kyle Brody was made to stand in a corner and listen to every bit of this. After he killed the 7 children, the witch told him to go into town, tell everyone what he had done, and he would be free of her. And of course, thanks to the movie, his famous words when he came down was, "I am finally finished." So of course, the woods were searched, his house was searched, they dug up the bodies in the basement, and of course he was arrested. He confessed to the crimes. He even said that he was sorry for doing it, but he was happy to be free of the voices. He never said it was the Blair Witch that made him do it, though. He said an old lady ghost. Parr was eventually hung in 1941, and his house was burned to the ground. So a lot of people kind of, discredit Rustin Parr, saying that he was just trying to put himself into the mythos of the Blair Witch. Take that for what you will. And so we now get to 1994, and that is when Heather Donahue, Joshua Leonard, and Mike Williams come into the picture. They come to Burkittsville to film a college project, to film about the Blair Witch, and they go into the woods. They never come back. Now, of course, a search was done, but the only evidence at that time found by police was Josh's car parked on Black Rock Road. And the search is eventually abandoned. of course, the same old story. The resources were used, they just could not find them. But in 1995, a anthropology class were out digging around the foundation of an old house that, was gone. Was this Rustin Parr's old house? Conflicting stories. But apparently a part of the wall collapsed, and they started digging around it, and they found this backpack that was buried at the side, and inside was, of course, a bunch of cassette tapes, film cans, Heather's journal, and the professor there was like, well, this has nothing to do with what we're here for. So he called the sheriff, and the footage was eventually watched by the police. They said it was inconclusive. Said all they saw was, the students themselves, some scary noises at night, and that's about it. Nothing where the police would definitely say, oh, something happened to them. And actually, the sheriff says that he believes it is a hoax. Now, the strange thing about the bag that was found at the site was the dirt and the earth around where the bag was undisturbed. It had not been dug up. Because if you're an anthropology professor, you can tell when the earth has been dug up. I mean, anyone can tell when earth, the dirt and all that has been recently dug up and then put back over. He said it was completely undisturbed. Either the house was built on top of this bag, or in the words of the professor himself, it was if it materialized. And of course, he is quoted as saying that's not the language of science, so he doesn't know what to think about that. So it's not until October 1997 when the footage is finally released to the families of the students, and Heather's mother gets hold of a film, gives the film to Haxon Films, and they release in 1999 the Blair Witch Project. So going over the film, of course, we see the students interviewing townspeople, and we kind of get the stories of Eileen Treacle, the Robin Weaver story, the Rustin Parr story, and then they go into the woods. You, of course, have them coming up on an area where there's rock piles and rock cairns in the trees and all that. And then you have instances of some scary noises at night, sounding like people walking all around them. You have one night where you hear little children laughing and their tent shaken and they run away from it. You've got an instance of them walking south all day and ending up in the same place they started. Then eventually Josh disappears. Then one night they hear him screaming in pain. Eventually, as Heather is pretty much giving up and Mike is slowly losing his mind, they hear Josh call them one night. It leads them to a house out in the woods, which looks very much like the Rustin Parr house that burned down. And they are led into the basement where Mike is forced to stay in the corner and Heather falls to the ground, and that is where the film ends. So, what to take from this? Well, of course, the story of the Blair Witch is all fiction. None of it sadly happened, but you have to admit, if you sit down, look over the mythos, and act like it's real, it makes for a very good, scary story. It really does. It sounds like a story you would have sat around the campfire and told your friends when you were little. It sounds like, it would have been one of the best creepypastas. It probably still is considered a great creepypasta because it was created right when the internet was really becoming mainstream. And I gotta give it to the film developers. They took advantage of it. I thought this was real when I first read it. Like I said, I remember my sister saying that she seemed to remember hearing about it back in 1994, even though it had never happened. They done that well of making it seem like this really happened. And of course, you have documentaries like Curse of the Blair Witch, which aired on Sci-Fi, that drew it even more because they had like news broadcasts. They had interviews with actors pretending to be like the family members and the professors that knew them, and it just made a really good setup to what I consider the best found footage film ever made. And like I said, even though the Blair Witch Project is not as scary as most movies, the idea of it is scary. Being lost out in the woods, hearing these creepy noises at night, and all you've really got besides the clothes on your back is a camera and, you know, running out of food, running out of, well, really, they had no choice of running out of drinkable water. The creek was right there, but you understand what I'm trying to say. The Blair Witch has one of the best legends ever created for a fictional film, and I think when people judge the movie harshly, they really should take into account the great story setup that this movie had. And that's why I always say, if you're going to watch the Blair Witch Project, watch Curse of the Blair Witch before you watch it. Now, of course, there are the events of Book of Shadows and the 2016 sequel, but I wanted to just stick with the core mythos and going into the Blair Witch Project because I think out of the three, it's the best film in the series. I hope you all enjoyed it. This was a little special video I wanted to do for Halloween. We should have two more videos up by Halloween, a new episode of Mysterious Darkness, hopefully on Friday, and then Sunday, Halloween, I'm going to do a special Monster Vision inspired watch along of the first Friday the 13th. I hope you join me for it. As always, guys, this is Canaan. Me and Jess love you all very, very much. Stay safe out there. Take care of yourselves. Never go walking in the woods at night by yourself, and I will see you in the next one. See ya.